Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. But America's agriculture landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertising campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food to the store where you buy the final product and everything in between. This is Real Ag. From farm safety to sunflowers, poultry to GMOs, it was an exciting year for Real Ag. We covered a lot of topics and traveled across the state to cover those topics. We will look back at this season of topics on this episode of Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Farmers need to watch out about a whole variety of things, from slips, trips, and falls to animal safety. They work in inclement weather, whether it be cold or hot conditions. They work around machinery that moves incredibly quickly. Just all sorts of things that farmers need to worry about.
Farm safety is one of those topics that everybody knows it. It's just not always in the forefront of your mind. And so I think farm safety is very important. I grew up on a farm. My dad was always very careful about where we were and what we were doing because he didn't want an accident to happen.
Production agriculture in that arena of farming, a lot of mechanical, physical activity is taking place. And whenever we have mechanical, physical activity taking place, there's room for danger.
As equipment has gotten larger, as planting and harvesting windows have become smaller, we go faster. We're less likely to look out for what's going on around us. We're trying to cover more ground. And farm safety just continues to be an absolutely critical thing that we need to remind folks about on the farm. And it's not just equipment, it's animals, it's so many different things that we have to remind ourselves about.
Most farmers probably underestimate the risk on a farm. I mean, we always tell ourselves to watch out for PTOs, watch out for augers. And I know on our farm, we've had a couple of accidents that were not as serious as they could have been, but they could have been pretty serious. And normally what happens is you're trying to do things in a hurry, you're really tired in harvest, everyone's head's not quite there. And so on our farm, we try to make sure that when we get into those periods of high stress, high exhaustion for a better word, that guys are really thinking about the potential dangers, and you look out for each other, and if you see someone doing something they shouldn't be doing, you let them know.
Farmers live and work typically in the same location, and many times they have multiple generations living and working in the same general location. So it's hard to keep youngsters out of danger areas unless they have a nice fenced-in area specifically for that. So the younger kids typically are extra riders on tractors. Riding extra is something that all kids seem to want to do, and it's hard for a parent or grandparent to say no when it's very dangerous activity. Lots of times that is the cause of the fatality for the younger people on the farm. And farming is an occupation that people don't retire from. It's in their blood or in their DNA. They live to farm. Many farmers, my grandma's like that. She did not stop farming until she could no longer farm, 2 weeks before she passed. It keeps them getting up in the morning. So that's why we have ages clear up to 97.
So air spraying is using an aircraft to apply pesticides to crops, growing crops. Pesticides being herbicides for killing weeds, insecticides for killing bugs, fungicides for disease, and also we spray fertilizer and also dry granular fertilizer we can spread and cover crop seeding as well.
Air spraying is the process of dispensing agricultural products through an airplane and doing it safely and efficiently.
You're not running over any crop, you're not getting any ground compaction. Maybe your accuracy is not quite as pinpoint as using a ground sprayer, but it definitely has its benefits and its reasons to use. Otherwise, you know, if there was really no reason to use it, we wouldn't use them.
We can dispense chemicals over crops without touching the crop.
If it's rainy or wet where you can't travel the ground, we use an airplane for that. Also, the crops like the corn right now is over 6 foot tall, and so traveling to spray corn for the fungus and the fungicides would damage the crop. Also, like on wheat, if you travel the wheat, you're driving over the wheat, and you're losing your crop by driving over it and killing it, and you're losing bushels that way.
This particular field, we did not have any aerial application done, mostly because it's small and we're in the middle of the experiment station. If this was on a regular farmer's field, most likely, yes, we would have some aerial application done, specifically for the head moth, because this is an insect that shows up when the flowers are, when the ray petals start to come away from the head of the sunflower and the head moths start showing up. They can be pretty detrimental to yield, and so then at that point we would have an aerial application done with some insecticide to control those head moths that are out on the sunflowers.
Yeah, we do utilize aerial spraying for some fungicides and stuff like that later in the corn growing season, mainly because, you know, at that point corn's too tall for us to cover with our ground rigs, so aerial spraying is applied for those reasons.
So we would look at doing the insecticide application aerially because we can get across the sunflowers. So if you were trying to spray with regular ground equipment, you're going to try to have to navigate rows, which can be a real challenge. And then we need something that's high enough so we are not breaking stems over as you would be driving equipment through it. So just to maintain the quality of your crop, aerial application makes more sense than trying to go over the top, because then inevitably we would be running over sunflowers and causing some damage to the plants.
I think there have been side hustles for decades. Dad was farming, and Mom had a job in town. Maybe she was a school teacher. That's great. That was a great arrangement because they had kids, and somebody could keep an eye on those kids during the day and then get them home, and they got to be part of the farm operation. That was my friends growing up. My mom worked in town and was part of one of the businesses that we owned. I think that has been the case for a number of years, and the drivers for that partially were what I identified about making sure that you had an idea where the kids were. The cost of health insurance is such a significant cost for farming operations today that if one spouse can have a job in town, that could bring insurance benefits to the family. That is a huge benefit. That's one of the draws at Servitech, is we offer insurance to the family here. So if we have somebody working in the labs or an agronomist and their spouse maybe is working on a family farm or whatever the case might be, they've got access to insurance because of one spouse's employment with Servitech, and that continues to be a really important factor.
I mean, farming has gotten harder and harder to make a profit, and I believe the statistic is like 80% of farms that have at least one person that works off farm to help supplement the farm. And whether it's done for insurance reasons or, you know, just paycheck reasons, cash flow, it's extremely high and it has to be done.
With the high cost of inputs and the lower cost of pay at the end of the season, farmers got to have something that they can have some extra income with. It's getting pretty touch and go with the farming, and I'm seeing a lot more farmers finding an extra income outside of farming.
One thing when we talk about side hustles, or when we talk about where producers are generating the bulk of their income, a lot of farms out there today, the primary operator actually has an off-farm job. Now, we don't like to call that a hobby farm, that's not what it is, but just because of the risk management and how much financial capital it takes to operate agriculture today, they may work at a bank, they may work as an independent seed dealer. A lot of producers already have the farm equipment, the large tractors, etc., so maybe they have an earth or a dirt contracting business that they kind of do on the side. I think when we start talking about couples, a lot of times one member of the family works off the farm as a school teacher or a librarian. There really is no one thing that, the bulk of off-farm income comes from this sort of industry, but I think it's all of the above. And when you start talking about some truly rural counties out there that have less than 3,000 people, there's not too much industry. So maybe it's a welding or a fabrication shop. When you start getting into some of the larger metropolitan areas, and I can think around, South Central Kansas, AGCO is a great, manufacturer of agricultural equipment there in Heston. A lot of farmers do work for AGCO in Heston, but then nights, weekends, etc., they own, operate the farm or ranch kind of in that Butler, Harvey, McPherson, Reno County area. And there's tons and tons of stories. We could, pick on Southwest Kansas. We could pick on a lot of folks here in the Manhattan community that may work on campus in K-State, but then they do have a farm or a ranch that they go home to at night and on weekends.
GMOs. GMOs stand for genetically modified organisms. And so to break that down, the genetics is basically the genes, so the traits that are actually in all organisms. The modified is the fact that we will actually go in and we will change some of the coding regions of the genes. And the organism is basically any living organism. So that could include plants, animals, bacteria.
And genetically modified crops are those that the DNA sequence, the genetic DNA of that crop has been manipulated for some type of reason to bring forth some benefit to that crop in terms of its production or in terms of the commodity that's produced from it. Not all crops are genetically modified. So in the state of Kansas, the primary genetically modified crops that exist in our state include corn and soybeans. Sorghum is a big crop in our region, is not genetically modified. Sunflowers are not genetically modified. Wheat is not genetically modified. So to answer the question about percentage of Kansas farmers that are raising genetically modified crops, if they have corn or they have soybeans, then 94% of all those corn and soybean acres in the state of Kansas were genetically modified. 0% of the wheat was, 0% of the sorghum was, 0% of the sunflowers are. There are some other genetically modified crops in American agriculture. Cotton is, sugar beets, and some others that we don't raise in Kansas, but it's corn and soybeans here in our state that are.
GMOs are highly misinformed throughout the consumer market. There is only 10 crops currently grown and approved within the US for GMO, that are GMO crops, okay? So a lot of these marketing campaigns that you're seeing at the store for tomatoes and even water, those aren't even eligible to be GM crops. And so it's very interesting to me that they've slapped the label on there saying non-GMO. It's a fear tactic. And so GM crops are genetically modified crops.
This isn't something new. Genetic modification's been going on forever. It's been going on since Adam and Eve, and that's the ability for animals and plants to adapt themselves over time to the environment. It is the fact that I'm taller than my dad, and my son will be taller than me. Those are the genetic modifications that are coming along. Part of that is diet-based, part of it is health, etc. Through technology, have the ability to influence that or to speed it up by identifying a very relevant piece of germplasm from one cell and moving it to another, or changing the strain or the sequence of the chromosomes to help make a plant healthier, to help make it more productive, to make it more drought resistant. That's how those came about.
Examples of GM products. One of the really exciting ones that happened was way back in 1982, and actually happens to be insulin. Insulin was one of the first GM products that were put out, and what the researchers did is they isolated the gene from humans that makes the insulin, and they put it into a bacteria. And then the bacteria would grow and excrete the insulin into the environment. You would harvest that, and that's basically what insulin people use for diabetes today.
domesticated fowl of any kind, as far as which would include chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, and guineas as well. The birds that were domesticated, around the world. I mean, we know that poultry has been domesticated by the recent books the recent studies that were just done, where they've been able to trace the DNA for chickens back 12,000 years and turkeys back 7,000 years. So those are the fowl that were domesticated and became part of the farming system and the industrial system of the world.
Honestly, from my perspective, I would just say, all forms of animals with wings that lay an egg, if you will. Ducks, turkeys, chickens, guinea fowl, peafowl. I consider all those poultry, if you will. Anything that produces an egg, so to speak.
I think of it from the farming angle. Anything that we raise for, food or fiber. About any bird species you can think of, from broilers that you eat for chicken or turkeys, egg production, even things like ratites for ostrich and things like that.
Many rural and even urban homeowners have taken up raising their own poultry for the collection of fresh meat and eggs. Often their flock is made of chickens, geese, ducks, turkeys, pheasants, or quail, and can become a part of the family. These new family members are a simple way to self-sufficiently care for the family, yard, and garden. What are the pros of growing and breeding poultry?
There's all kinds of benefits. I mean, obviously the first one is I'll never run out of food. if that ever happens, I've got plenty. I got a stockpile here. Chickens are fascinating creatures. They remind me of little dinosaurs running around. Chickens are important to preserve the culture and the history of what's here, and to preserve it right, and to preserve it the way they were meant to be. I breed turkeys to hatch them out for chicks, and to spread my flock and my line to somebody else's flock and somebody else's line. The breeds that I carry are popular breeds with other breeders. So I love the fact that people will get in touch with me and want my line that I've spent time raising and perfected, and just put my TLC into. Turkeys are amazing. You get turkey eggs, which you can eat, but more importantly, I mean, they're dual purpose, so you got eggs and you can eat them as well. Their attitudes are just so chill. They can be aggressive, don't get me wrong. I mean, I got a turkey that'll jump up in my Polaris with me and go cruising with me. I mean, they'll just come, they'll eat out of my hands, It all depends how you raise them. They're awesome pets. Really what all these animals are for me are pets. Pets that I take care of, and friends that I talk to, hang out with, and share with people all over the country.
In our state, we have an opportunity for growing birds in a very sustainable manner. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a lot of commercial birds across the United States, they're grown in areas where they have concentrated litter, and it's difficult to use the byproduct nutrients in that litter, like nitrogen and phosphorus. And in Kansas, we have wide open spaces, and we have the crops that need those nitrogen and phosphorus nutrients. So it's a hugely sustainable entity here in the state, for sure.
There are several different diseases that Kansas farmers go after, and it depends on what crop you're talking about. For soybean, for example, we have soybean cyst nematode. It's a soil-borne worm that actually feeds on the roots of the soybeans and creates millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage to it. We also have different fungal diseases for soybeans. One notably is sudden death syndrome, which will cause a lot of destruction too on the yield. For wheat, we've got lots of different diseases. I think the number 1, 2, and 3 are stem rust, leaf rust, and Fusarium head blight are 3 of the major fungal pathogens on wheat. We also have viruses, wheat streak mosaic virus, which also can impact Kansas from time to time.
We are in a climate here that doesn't have as much rainfall and doesn't have as much humidity especially in this region where I'm standing today. And those are factors that tend to drive and elevate the pressure of disease and pests. So for Kansas producers, the threat of disease is dependent on the environmental condition of the season. We can have situations where we get through a crop cycle with a crop of wheat, for example, and have very little disease pressure. We have some things that we know to prevent. At time of planting, soil-borne diseases can be managed with seed treatment. And then as the weather goes, we find out if the conditions create diseases like a foliar disease, rust in wheat. In sunflowers, then we are more probably concerned with insect pests, but it's just so dependent upon what the weather brings to us.
Diseases like fungicides and mold and those type of issues, it just depends on the weather, really. It's really all very weather sensitive. We're typically fairly dry here, so we don't have a lot of that, but we do get a lot of, in the spring, like right now with this, we've seen a lot of rust and disease and stuff out in the wheat crops, so that's pretty common. So again, that'll be maybe a fungicide spray or something like that.
When we're talking on the viral side of things, the first virus that really pops into my mind is wheat streak mosaic. So this is a virus in wheat that basically is moved by the wheat curl mite. And this is this teeny tiny microscopic insect that lives on volunteer wheat. So right now we're here in August, and volunteer wheat would be growing out in some of these fields that we harvested in July. So volunteer wheat has came up, and the wheat curl mites can be living on that volunteer wheat. And then as that quality of volunteer wheat is going down because of drought stress and heat and everything else, they are looking to move to a better quality host plant. And so they're then going to be moving into the newly emerging wheat that we're going to be planting here in September. When those curl mites are moving, that virus is inside the curl mites, and when they start feeding on the next bit of wheat, then they're transferring that virus. And so it's this cycle that continues around because they always seem to have a host plant out in the field for them to be living on. And so one of the things we talk a lot about is controlling volunteer wheat. And the whole purpose of controlling volunteer wheat is to break this green bridge. Green bridge is basically the host plants that they're living on when they're not in a regular wheat crop. And so we talk a lot about having a 2-week break where there's no volunteer wheat. And the whole reason is that way we are controlling the curl mites essentially by controlling the host that they're living on to help prevent that virus being moved from plant to plant.
Well, over the years, sunflowers in western Kansas were regularly planted. I mean, you didn't have to drive very far to find a sunflower field planted in Kansas. We've seen some of that diminish, partly, I think, driven by fewer processing facilities available. You know, there's really a couple different types of sunflowers. There's sunflowers that are grown for an oil, for the extraction of an oil, and then there are sunflowers that are grown that are kind of a confectioner's type seed. So it's used in food recipes, etc. So they become a little more specialized. That's probably also had an impact on acreage. You still see quite a few grown north, so our agronomists that'll be in Nebraska or folks we talk to in the Dakotas will still see some sunflowers grown there, and you'll still see them. If you head down I-70 west towards Colorado, you're going to see sunflowers grown. You'll see fields every fall. Especially, they're easy to see then. That big head, and it kind of follows the movement of the sun over the horizon. But there are fewer just because of the impact of the reduced number of processing facilities that are available. So the plant's fairly efficient when it comes to its use of moisture and the amount of moisture required to mature that crop. And then I think as much as that as anything was the fact that there were processing facilities that are available, but those have consolidated and moved where it's further away, and so now you've got to haul those seeds further to get them processed into whatever their endpoint's going to be. So that's probably had the negative effect is the fact that it's just less economical for a grower to be able to take advantage of growing sunflowers because they've got to haul them further for processing.
They're just a very neat crop. They're another alternative for farmers. I think it's very interesting that even though Kansas is the sunflower state, a majority of the commercial level sunflowers are grown in the North and South Dakotas, but it is another option for farmers here as a commercial crop. These are clearfield sunflowers, so that way we can spray different herbicides and have options for a herbicide program. There's a lot of people that do it organically. For us, that's not the option that we're pursuing.
These are actually oil type sunflowers, and so the oil type sunflowers are the kind that get crushed to be made into oil. And so these are a small black hulled sunflower, but they're a small black hulled sunflower, and they are crushed that would be turned into the oil, or when you're eating potato chips, some of those are actually fried in sunflower oil. And so these are the oil type sunflowers. Now there's another type of sunflowers which are the confection sunflowers, and confection sunflowers are the kind that you eat when you're at a ball game. They are the larger kernel size that have the white stripes on them. So these here are just oil types, but then we do have some other plots with confection type sunflowers in them.
Side hustles, disease management, and even air spraying. We looked at quite a range of topics in this season of Real Ag. We hope you've enjoyed this season of Real Ag. As always, you can check out this and other episodes of Real Ag on SmokyHillsPBS.org. From the producers at Smoky Hills PBS, this has been Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.